let's take these two simple chords and turn them into a groove that sounds like this. And this. This is part one of my series on applying different grooves to this simple two-chord progression. Today we're going to break this particular groove down into 10 simple steps that you can apply to any chord progression. And if you'd like to download the sheet music to follow along for free, that's at pianofluency.com. All right, for step one, I just want you to do this. I like to call this groove plinky eighths or hi-hat eighths because we're playing these repeated eighth notes, these percussive eighth notes in our right hand that are kind of like what a drummer will do on their hi-hat, right? So we're mimicking that with our right hand, and ultimately we're going to use chords, but we want to start with single notes. So you can just get familiar with this percussive feeling and to feel very, very relaxed in your hand. You know, the sound here is not coming from a finger motion so much as it's coming from this bigger, relaxed arm movement. So let's start by going back and forth from finger 2, that's your pointer finger, to finger 3, your middle finger, on G and A flat. And these are chord tones from this alternating chord pattern. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and just keep that up and see how steady you can make that groove. Now let's add some harmony. So I'm adding my thumb beneath both of these top notes here, and we're just following along stepwise. That starts to make it a little more interesting because we can hear the harmony of the chords. Now for step 3, let's add the left hand bass notes, and we'll really hear the harmony now. It starts to sound a little more like the version B of this pattern that I played at the start of the video. Let's add a third note to the right hand. And this is going to be C in our finger 5, our pinky, on both chords. And you notice what's happened now. We have the full 3 notes of a C major chord, but we're playing them in first inversion. So we have the C 1 octave higher on top. And then for the F minor chord, we're just playing a root position F minor chord. And we're alternating between those. This is good voice leading because we have that same note on top for both chords. This is already a great groove that you can practice at lots of different tempos. If you have any sort of drum machine tool you like to practice along with, or maybe there's one built into your keyboard, you can already do that at this point and just get really comfortable with this feeling of maintaining a groove. Now let's add a bit of a challenge. The left hand is going to play some syncopation. So the rhythm here is 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. We call these pushes. We're playing on the and of 2 and the and of 4. And you notice the F minor chord actually comes a bit early. It comes on the and of 4 instead of on the downbeat of the second measure. So that's a pushed chord. It's a chord that's coming 1/8 note early for the strong beat, the typical strong beats of 1 and 3. And it adds a little bit of syncopation and rhythmic interest to a simple chord progression like this. So let's try that hands together. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, push. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and. And I like to end this phrase, this 4-measure phrase, by doing one more pushed chord and bass note on the and of 2 for that F minor chord. Now we just reached step 5. We're halfway there on this particular groove. And if some of the skills here are starting to feel a little bit beyond you, I highly recommend you become a member at pianofluency.com because I have a curriculum path laid out there in a way that I just can't do on YouTube. And I also give support to students when they're working through that curriculum. It's a way where you can improve and learn all of the skills that we're covering here in a very step-by-step methodical approach. So if that sounds interesting to you, head over to pianofluency.com and learn more about becoming a member. All right, for step 6, let's keep things pretty similar to what we just did, but move the right hand up 1 octave. So now it's going to sound like this. This is one of my favorite arranging tips to give students. You can always move things up or down an octave on the piano. That applies to both hands, and a lot of times it creates a totally different sound without having to find any new chord shapes. We can do basically the same thing in the left hand, although in the left hand what I'm going to do is add another note. I'm going to double these bass notes at the octave. So instead of going, now I'm going to play, and you can feel how much weightier that feels and makes it a lot more exciting and rhythmic. It sounds more like a bass player. Let's do one more thing in the right hand that brings this to the full version I played at the start of the video. I'm going to double that C on the top of the right hand down 1 octave. So everything else about the chord shape stays the same. I'm going to have to shift my fingering a little bit so that I have my thumb free for that extra C on the bottom. And I end up with these 4-note chord shapes that are still triads. So it still is just a C major triad and an F minor triad, but now I have 1 note in each chord that's doubled. It happens twice, C and C. And that really reinforces the sound of the melody of that top C, and it gives us a much stronger shape in our hand to play percussively. We're almost there. Let's add this little melodic fill in the bass. It's going to sound like this. So I'm just walking down from the F back down to the C, and the rhythm is 4, E, and. So you can play that with the 8th notes in the right hand. 4, E, and 1. The rhythmic coordination is what's going to make that challenging. A little bit faster, that whole measure of F minor sounds like this. 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, E, and 1. And in context. Now I'm going to give you one bonus 10th step. It sounds like this. So I'm rolling the chord shape in my right hand, so all the notes don't land at exactly the same time. It gives us a little bit more attitude. And in some styles of music, when you're playing this kind of percussive 8th note pattern in your right hand, it really helps to add this in. So you want to think about this as coming from the arm or the wrist. It's a bigger movement. It's not so much something that I'm doing with my fingers. It's more like I get my hand in place, and then I move my arm across the keys. And that's how I get that rolled chord sound. And it's really fun to add that in at these kind of slower tempos for this. If we're comparing this to a drummer's hi-hat, this might be a hi-hat that's just slightly open. So the sound is a little bit longer. Instead of ch, 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 It's ch, 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 right? Instead of. So that's really fun to play around with. And with that, we've covered all 10 steps for you to explore this plinky eighth note right-hand chord pattern on your own. Feel free to apply this to lots of different chord progressions. Try it in different styles. It's a really fun one to play around with. With that, I want to thank you for joining me. Come back next week, or if you're watching in the future, just go to the next video in the playlist to keep going in this series on applying different grooves to the same two chords. My name is Ted with Piano Fluency.